you everyone for coming out tonight. This is our first Development and Operations Service Standing Committee meeting with our new council, so I will be calling the Standing Committee to order this evening. We will begin with the election of our chair and vice chair so we can continue with the meeting. So before I proceed, I'll give you a brief overview of the election process. I'll first call for nominations. A member may nominate another member or themselves, and a nomination does not require a seconder. I will continue to call for nominations until no further nominations are put on the floor, and will confirm with each nominee if they are in favor of their name being put forward. I will then ask each nomination in order of the nomination to briefly explain why they're interested in the position that they have been nominated for. And after each nomination has spoken, I will then call the vote on the nominees based in order of their nomination. The first member receiving majority vote will be elected. If only one person is nominated, the nominee will be accepted and the individual will be acclaimed to the position and no vote is required. So that being said, I will call the question. Are there any nominations for the position of chair for the Development and Operations Services Standing Committee? Councillor Doherty?
Thank you. I nominate Councillor Jeffrey.
Thank you. Are there any further nominations for the position of chair? That being said, Councillor Jeffrey, do you accept the position of chair?
I do.
That being said, Councillor Jeffrey has accepted the position of chair. And now we'll call for the position of vice chair. Is there any nominations for vice chair for this committee?
I would like to nominate Councillor Doherty for the position of vice chair.
Okay, so Councillor Doherty has been nominated. Is there any further nominations? Okay, you guys are making it easy for me. Thank you. That being said, I claim Councillor Doherty as vice chair for the Development and Operations Standing Committee. Thank you, and now we'll proceed with the agenda as it's been prescribed.
Thank you very much, Deputy Clerk. And we'll see if we can get back into the swing of this. So first, just welcome to everyone. We also are taping by Rogers and live streaming through the town website. And we're very happy to see a very full gallery this evening. And we have, I believe, a historic 4 10-minute deputations booked this evening. So today we acknowledge that this event is taking place on the traditional territory of the Indigenous peoples of Turtle Island. We are thankful to share in the special spirit of this place, rich in the energy of Mother Earth, our ancestors, and the love of all creation. So first we'll go with the adoption of the agenda, and that the content of the Development and Operations Services Standing Committee agenda for January 21st, 2019 is adopted, be adopted as presented. And you can move in a seconder.
So moved.
Thank you. Vice Chair Doherty and Deputy Mayor Hall. All those in favor? And that is carried. All right. So are there any declarations of pecuniary interest with regard to files this evening?
Yes, Madam Chair, there's several items on the agenda this evening that deal with the development that's called Eden Oak. And Eden Oak is located beside a property that I own. So you might even call this Eden Oak night. There are 4 items that I will be rising and leaving the chambers for because of my conflict. They are items 6.2, 6.3, 7.4, and 7.6.
Thank you, Councilor Henry. Any others? Okay. Seeing none, we do have on the agenda business arising from the previous meeting, but those last minutes were adopted at our first council meeting, I believe, of this term, so we don't have anything arising from that. So before we move to deputations, I'd like just to do another little reminder of the rules of engagement here for the committee. We're so pleased to have public input, but just like you to know that we really need you to use the mic up here, and to speak you need to be acknowledged by the chair to come forward. The 4 deputations that have been booked will be 10 minutes. We will be timing and give a 1-minute warning so the speaker knows to wrap up. And at the end of the meeting, we have an opportunity for anyone from the public to come up and give, to use 5 minutes to bring to our attention or give input on anything that is in the agenda or not on the agenda, but relevant to our Development Operations Services mandate. And during the meeting, when we bring items forward for discussion, we will ask, firstly, after it's put on, the staff information is put on the floor, we will ask if there's anyone from the public wishing to speak to that specific item, again, following some of the timing rules. And so I think this way we can all have an effective and efficient experience. So with that, we will move on to deputations. And our first is Collingwood's growth, 6.1, and its consequences on the environment. And it's Carl Mishner, Blue Mountain Watershed Trust. If you could please come forward.
Hello, Madam Chair, thank you. I'm speaking on behalf of the Blue Mountain Watershed Trust. Thank you for having us. This is a short presentation. It's about 6.5 minutes, so my hope is that afterwards, if the councillors or town staff have any questions or points of discussion, we can fill up the 5 minutes with that. Okay, so the thrust of the presentation is that excessive growth has consequences for the natural environment. On the next slide. So that's not actually the next slide. That's the third slide. There we go. So the Blue Mountain Watershed Trust, just as a very quick update, we are a 25-year-old environmental organization, a registered charity. We have no paid employees, we're all volunteer. And our mission is to preserve and enhance the Blue Mountains watershed ecosystem. One of the main things that we try and do is to prevent development which threatens sensitive natural features. We also pursue an education program, we plant trees, we engage with the ski resorts on scarification and performing new runs and water treatment. We engage with the golf courses on their use of pesticides and antifungals, etc., and many other things besides. We, over the course of our existence, have participated in 9 OMB hearings and would like to not participate in any more if possible. Next slide, please. So humanity, according to the Guardian newspaper in December, humanity has wiped out 60% of wildlife since 1970. A stark figure, that's mammals, birds, fish, and reptiles, and we believe that we have a part to play to stem the tide and help reduce the ongoing loss right here in Collingwood. Wetlands are the prime habitat for conservation of reptiles, amphibians, and most of these species are at risk. In the Silver Creek wetland, which is provincially significant and the most significant in southern part of Georgian Bay, there are 4 species of turtles, 2 snakes, 8 species of frogs and salamanders, dozens of bird species, fish, deer, otters, beavers, and many other mammals. So wetlands like Silver Creeks hold an amazing concentration of wildlife. They also perform other important functions such as storing water to prevent flooding, and part of that is preventing sedimentation of Georgian Bay, which has detrimental effects on fish nesting habitat and other factors. So that's why we believe it's really essential to protect these wetlands along southern Georgian Bay, as well as the watercourses that lead to them. Where we're not doing it when we allow dense residential construction too close to wetlands or in areas surrounded wetlands, like for example what is being proposed at Constantly East. Next slide, please. Our policy on population growth is that we defend intensification. It is a good thing when it is done appropriately, and appropriately being the operative word. We are opposed to excessive density where it may cause harm to sensitive natural areas. Infill is good, transformation of brown lands are good, building in a wetland is not good. We favor sustainability over excessive population growth every single time, however. Next slide, please. So the presentation that we're doing here covers the fact that the municipality is restrained, as all municipalities are, by provincial regulations and practices, including the Planning Act, the Provincial Policy Statement, and the Local Planning Appeal Tribunal processes. So we're requesting help from Council. Some of our other efforts we're going to talk about, a summary of what we're doing, and a request for a further meeting with several councillors to outline specific action steps to be brought to the entire council. So the action that we hope to come out of this presentation is a further meeting with several councillors that will lead to further action steps. We should note that there is a lower priority in the province placed on environmental matters currently, but that's a separate issue and really has no bearing on what we're talking about here today. Next slide, please. So what we would like to happen is we want the province to transfer a little more power to the municipality. Currently, the planning department is wary of going beyond the provincial policy statement for additional protection of sensitive natural areas. There are several reasons for this. Because the OMB, now the LPAT, has tended to act as if the provincial policy statement has precedence over the official plans. So planning is worried about losing costly appeals. So to correct that, we're speaking with LPAT currently and asking them to declare unequivocally that they will respect the official plan in municipalities when it goes beyond the provincial policy statement. We're getting some traction there. This would also allow the official plan to define use in case of legal non-conforming use to prevent, for example, a substantive change in use such as at 70 Madeline Drive and the Living Waters proposal in the town of Collingwood. Essentially, we want to expand the natural habitat instead of filling in flood-prone areas. Again, we're not opposed to development, but it must be appropriate. The Conservation Authority Act, unfortunately, does not encourage this. Next slide, please. So what we would like Council to do is to aggressively petition the province for more power in these areas that we've described. We would like you to resist when the province sets population targets that you believe cannot be met sustainably. So intensification-wise, conservation authorities of increased intensity, we'd like to increase required buffers for protection of natural features, and we would like to place, for the planning department, to place added stress on care in planning for sewers and other utilities. Next slide, please. We should mention that, when the next slide comes, thank you, that there is an urban forest management plan in place. Funding has been found for this plan. It's great. We would expect that this stronger tree conservation bylaw will result from it as well. So, next slide. Okay, we have it. We actively monitor new developments that may harm sensitive natural features throughout our area. And this region is noted for its natural environment. In fact, it's our natural environment that's responsible for residents' enjoyment of the area, as well as a large portion of the business, tourism, and municipal revenues that we enjoy. If we continue to degrade the natural environment at the rate we're currently doing in the Collingwood Blue Mountains area, we're going to lose not only on a global scale, but on a very local scale as well. Degradation will affect our constituents' enjoyment of the Collingwood Blue Mountains area. They're not coming from Mississauga to enjoy Mississauga, they're coming from Mississauga to enjoy Collingwood. The verdure, the green areas, the fresh air. And it will negatively impact revenues across the board if we lose it. So let's not lose it. Let's try and actively enhance our natural environment rather than the opposite. So in summary, next slide please. We've shown some of our actions and priorities, and we request your action, your help for increasing municipal powers. So we propose a meeting with a few select councillors to discuss some specific actions to take to council. And our question is, will you grant us that meeting? Thank you. I'll invite my colleague and fellow director Don Kerr up to help field questions if there are any. He's the fount of knowledge.
Okay, thank you. Committee members, do we have any questions for Trust? Okay, thank you very much. I think that was a pretty succinct presentation, so thank you very much, and we look forward to an official request with respect to the meetings you're asking.
Thank you.
Take care.
Okay, Councillor Hammond, I guess the next two will have you recuse yourself. All right, so next up, 6.2, infill development concerns and potential to change policy and procedure. Joanne Bowden. Welcome, Joanne.
Good evening to the committee members, and thank you for the opportunity to speak. Tonight, I am here to speak about changes to the planning policies in regards to infill development. I will share some of the experiences from dealing with the Eden Oak infill development known as Indigo. I will make reference to the methods other communities in the province use to deal with such situations. These references show that a planning policy can have teeth to protect the surrounding neighborhood while meeting all of the province's intensification mandates. Let's start at the beginning, compatibility. There needs to be a measure of whether a new development is compatible with the existing neighborhood. Burlington has such a measure that has held up to a tribunal challenge. They recognize that all development will have effects on a neighborhood, but have a number of tests that ask, are those effects adverse and unacceptable? So let's look closer at what adverse means. For Burlington, it is defined as having an impact on privacy and overlook. These are two issues we have struggled with since we became aware of the extreme elevation changes proposed for the Eden Oak site. And of course, loss of privacy and issues of homes overlooking us affects our property values. So what is the solution to these adverse effects? Well, in Burlington, they clearly define transition zones and deal with the problem right up front. The test here is the proposed development capable of existing together in harmony with the surrounding neighborhood? Landscaping and fencing would then be called for. This was and still is a viable solution for us. Replacement trees to augment the imperfect screening that remains. This would greatly reduce the adverse effects in our situation. There are some tools in the current planning bylaws that would have allowed for this already to occur. So I would strongly suggest that every infill application go through similar tests to determine what needs to be committed to by the developer to transition with the existing neighborhood without adverse effects. This requires a culture within the planning and engineering departments and around the council table that states loud and clear to developers that although we are open for business, we need to ensure that new development can exist in harmony with neighborhoods. It requires viewing plans from the outside in so the effect on the perimeter can be realized. John Vellick of our engineering staff said it best in response to our initial concerns in December of 2017. It is the responsibility of the developer to ensure that this subdivision does not adversely impact neighboring properties. The town is committed to holding them to this standard. This should be our gold standard. When it comes to heights, we are all aware that the water table has resulted in the need for a great deal of earth to be brought onto the site, and the new homes will be perched in the neighborhood of 11 to 14 feet above the existing homes. This currently seems to be a moving target, as the sixth submission shows further increases in elevations. Behind me, I'm looking at another 1.5 feet on top of the already proposed 13 feet. Again, the same tests of adverse effects would apply, and the use of buffering to create compatibility could be used as it is in Burlington. A proper transition zone would be required. Although we appreciate the 2-meter fence, please keep in mind that once the homes are built, this will merely mask the basement windows. The only solution is trees that can grow and resolve the issues of privacy and overlook. Communications. Halton Hills requires a detailed communication plan from developers. This includes a contingency plan that addresses any additional impacts to private residents or municipal property not foreseen in the construction management plan, including notification, compensation, and conflict resolutions. Through the last year and a half, it has been difficult to determine what the protocol is for relaying changes, schedules, and updates between the developer, the town, and the residents. To say it has been frustrating would be an understatement. In a perfect world, it would have been nice to know exactly what one could expect and to feel confident that the expectations outlined in correspondence from the developer was in line with what the town not only expected, but had approved. I will cite a few examples of what should not have happened, all involving the residents bringing the situation to staff's attention, all involving a reactive rather than a proactive call to action from the developer, all adding additional adverse effects. A resident has confirmed that she will have a minimal retaining wall with a fence on top installed. She goes to work with the 2 courses of retaining wall that she expects. She comes home to a 4-foot retaining wall. After contacting the town, it becomes evident that this was a change in the 6th submission, a change not highlighted in the comment section as would be expected in order to alert the staff when reviewing a new submission. This submission also included a dramatic change to the retaining wall behind the west pond and a further increase in elevation. These changes have additional impacts to private residents and resulted due to discrepancies in the topographical surveys done by the engineering firm. With a contingency plan, notification would have been called for and resolution provisions could have occurred. Prior to the wall being built, the current method consumes far too many hours of senior staff time and places unrealistic expectations on the residents. The elevation change appears to be a result of a change in home styles. This change further impacts adverse privacy and overlooked concerns. Again, the dramatic change in the retaining wall behind the pond was not noted in comments on the 6th submission by the developing engineers. Town staff were not aware of the change and therefore had not considered the impact it would have on the residents. The expectation of these residents, based on previous town staff input, was a 0.3 meter retaining wall with a 4-foot black chain link fence, which would allow them to view a scenic landscape pond. This picture was painted to discourage the request for a continuation of the 2-meter privacy fence. The solution to this unforeseen change was a compromise by the residents, not the developer. Their choice: cut down their trees and have a smaller retaining wall, or keep their trees and view a 5-foot retaining wall with a chain link fence bolted to the top through their existing trees. This is a no-win situation to solve an issue not foreseen by the developer. No compensation or conflict resolution came into play. This has to change. Let's stop for a minute and think what could have happened when stronger planning policies and more dedicated view of adverse effects, standing on the outside looking in, what could have happened? The engineers could have gone back to see if there was any more aesthetically pleasing solution. Could a wooden privacy fence been put on the north side of the retaining wall, and then there would be no need for the chain link fence? Could the developer be required to provide a landscaping package to these residents to soften the view of the wall? It is a given that a property with a view of an abutting wall and fence to a total of 9 feet creates an adverse effect. We need to be more solutions oriented, much more proactive, a lot less reactive. The compromises expected from existing neighbors has to be balanced with the compromises expected from the developer. Site management. In a number of municipalities, the town assigns a staff member to monitor the site at the developer's expense. The Eden Oak site is not consistently monitored and problems are left to surrounding citizens to report. Regular monitoring and immediate requests to resolve these deficiencies would streamline the communication process. Fallen or missing fences, ponding water, and blowing dirt would be a few examples that could have been handled without the need for deputations and senior staff meetings. The current method of complaint-driven reaction needs to stop. It is too much of a burden on the surrounding neighborhood. It is reasonable that the cost associated with a problematic site should be borne by the developer. A stellar developer would then be motivated to keep monitoring costs at a minimum by being proactive. Public meetings. The public comes to these meetings to ensure they are not going to be unduly affected by a new development. This is not an opportunity for a developer to sing the praises of a development and its amenities. It is a time for the developer to outline what efforts they are going to make to fit into the surrounding neighborhood. 3 issues consistently arise: drainage, tree removal, and replacement plans, and also the implication to traffic flow. The planning department should have the developer address these issues up front at the first public meeting. Let them know that consideration of the surrounding neighborhood is a priority for Collingwood. Read them the gold standard and let them rise to it. Encourage being proactive, not reactive, to the inevitable same questions.
Joanne, you
Yes?
1 minute word.
I have how much?
1 minute.
1 minute, okay, so I'm gonna just go to our asks then. So, in conclusion, before any discussion of a plan of subdivision approval, we respectfully ask for the following. A commitment from the town to mitigate for trees on our properties. These would be justified as replacement trees. A plan of subdivision should not be entered in until a limit on the increased elevation takes place. Solve the drainage issues on Gulfview, and come to some kind of consideration about the significant changes to the retaining wall. So once more, I'm going to repeat. It is the responsibility of the developer to ensure that this subdivision does not adversely impact neighboring properties. The town is committed to holding them to the standard, and it's now time for you all to walk the talk. Thank you for your time.
Councillor Doherty, Deputy Mayor Hall, do you have any questions through to Joanne on deputation?
No, but I thank you for a very thorough presentation.
There was more, but I ran out of time.
I had a very interesting walk and talk with Joanne, and minus 25 yesterday, I think.
All right, then we will move on to continuing draining issues on Gulfview Drive. Mr. Richardson, if you could come forward here.
Hello, everybody. I hope you're all well. I like to be called Mr. Richardson. It makes me feel important. Okay, second slide, please. I just put a little map up because I found out that most of the residents in this town don't even know where Gulfview is. So anyway, that's where it is, and that's where we abut the Eden Oak development. Next slide, please. The agenda, I mean, the problem here is drainage. And next slide, please. The developer came in, they ripped out all the trees. Of course, they raped the topsoil. They ruined there was a tile system, a farmer's tile system, which was all dismantled basically. And there were catchment basins that the farmers used to use that were just all filled in. Next slide, please. So you can see just by those pictures as to what happened over the last couple of years. Next slide, please. The next thing is that there was a study done by Ainley on the pond that's going into the southwest, I guess, the southwest area, and it looks like if you read those numbers, that Gulfview is looked at as a spillway because it was a berm that took everything above the height of where the water would come to the top of the pond. That berm is no longer there. Okay, it was taken out by the developer, even though I believe it was on town property. So we have, next slide please. So the current situation is this: we have a drainage problem. We've got some pumps running that have never run before. It started off with a flood in our backyard last spring. There was some attempted mitigation by putting in an ugly ditch. That hasn't worked. Some pumps are running in our house and across the street. The other thing is that the pond basically right now is just a mess, and nobody knows what the appropriate elevations are supposed to be or anything else. There appears to be a new report that says that there doesn't need to be a clay liner in the pond. Yet I don't know about you folks, but I don't think the level of the land has changed from the bottom up. So there's a whole number of issues here that really need to be addressed, okay? And one of the things is I noticed, I've got to put my glasses on now. That's one of these aging things, you know. There's a recommendation in the agenda that council authorizes the mayor and clerk to execute the Eden Note subdivision agreement by passing the attached authorizing bylaw subject to staff receiving the remaining securities and administration fee. Well, if I look at the recommendation in the actual staff report, it says that staff report blah 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 be received and council authorized the mayor and clerk to execute the Eden Oak subdivision agreement by passing the attached authorizing bylaw subject to staff receiving the remaining securities, final drawings, and final cost estimate and administration fee. So the agenda is not consistent. But the other thing is, okay, I've run large corporations and started business. I have never, ever, in 50 years in business, seen something where the cart is put before the horse. I don't see how a subdivision agreement can be approved before we know what the final plans are, the final costs are gonna be, and what the impacts are. Anyway, enough said. Thanks for your time, everybody.
Thank you very much. Any questions? Thank you very much, Mr. Richardson. And if we could ask for Councillor Hamlin to return. Okay, so next up we have improvements needed to zoning bylaw re-infill development and Marg Chevigny.
Thank you, Madam Chairperson, council members. It's timely to be here tonight, everybody talking about infill and talking about subdivisions, but I'd like to drill down and talk about infill in already existing neighborhoods. As most of you know, I'm a local realtor and past chair of a vocal ratepayers group and past chair of Collingwood's Vision 2020, and I'm only saying that to establish that I have an understanding of planning and a passion for good planning in our community. Over the last year, my husband and I have become very aware of the weaknesses in both the form and implementation of our current zoning bylaw in respect to infill development. I appreciate that council has made a review of the bylaw, one of its priorities, and it's in that context that I'd like to speak today. As Collingwood grows and infill development takes shape with ever-increasing densities, we're starting to more directly be able to see and feel the impact of that on our town. I would like to say we do wholeheartedly support intensification, but we believe that we can do it in a way that is far better than what our current bylaw allows. In respect to intensification, it starts with our official plan, which in section 4.3 states, among other things, that intensification must be based on criteria that is sensitive to the urban design and character of adjacent buildings, including their location, massing, height, and building materials. And secondly, compatible with the character and streetscapes of surrounding neighborhoods. I'd like to show you an example of intensification under our bylaw on a property that abuts our own home, and we can decide if our bylaw has adhered to those principles in the official plan. The photo that you see up there, just to give you some context, the little green dot is our house on Smart Court, which runs off of Campbell Street. And the property we're talking about fronts on Campbell Street, where the little red dot is. So our backyard backs on to the side yard and backyard of the Campbell Street property. So that gives you some orientation. Can we go to the second photo? Many of you may be aware of that property. That's the one on Campbell Street, which many of us know as being the original Smart Farm homestead. The third photo, if we can just flip to that, is a bird's eye view. Again, you'll see the house says 234, which is the subject property that we're talking about, and our house is the one with all those solar panels on it, on Smart Court. As you can see, there's an existing lot, or an existing house on that lot that runs behind our property. So last spring, we got a call from the owners of that property to kindly inform us that they were going to be building an accessory apartment addition. And of course, we support intensification, and given that the bylaw states that an accessory apartment cannot exceed 40% of the size of the principal dwelling unit, we naively made the assumption that that would be about 800 square feet, given that the existing home is actually about 1,900 square feet. You can imagine our shock when we came home from vacation this summer and saw the following photograph, please. There is almost an 80-foot wall, 27 feet from the back of our house. What happened in actual fact was that an addition of over 3,600 square feet was added on to the original Smart Farm homestead. The owners intend to move into that addition as their principal residence and then consider the existing house, which they've never lived in, it's just been used as a rental, as the accessory suite. The height, the massing, the scale, by no means are compatible with the existing neighborhood, and they have impacted the character of the entire neighborhood. Our neighbors across the street and one street down can see the roof of this house. The owners have effectively built a brand new house, and no development charges were payable, there was no lot grading, no drainage studies required, no site plan required. We've lost sunlight, we've lost privacy, the wind shears have changed, and we fear what will happen in the spring when we deal with spring runoff. If we can go to the next photo, here you can see it with the cladding on it in relation to our backyard. We maintain that the bylaw did not permit this. The bylaw states that an accessory use must be subordinate to the main use. It then goes on to say that no accessory use shall be established on the lot without a main building having been first established. In this case, the town allowed a reversal of the order of this rule, and the consequences are enormous. Under the bylaw, the addition should have been no more than 800 square feet, but instead it's over 3,600 square feet. The impact of that is very significant. Setting aside the finer points of our own case, we just use that as a very concrete visual example. This has raised our and other people's awareness of the growing numbers of examples around town, and there are many, where intensified or infill development in existing neighborhoods has not been compatible with existing uses, nor with the intention of the official plan, and we believe that we can certainly do better. To that end, we feel there needs to be a very, very thorough review of the zoning bylaw to address the multitude of issues that have or can arise. We're not experts in the field, but we would like to offer a bit of a list of some obvious areas we think require attention. Consideration should be given to variable lot configurations. In our case, applying side yard setbacks against a shallow lot do not allow the intended buffer that's needed. There should be a minimum setback established for distances not just to a lot line, but to the surface of an adjacent dwelling through flanking setbacks, and we do find that in zoning bylaws in other communities in Ontario. When site coverage says 50% is allowed, that should not include the side yard setbacks, where only 1.2 meters of unusable space is included in that. As seen in our example, the neighboring lot is unusually deep, so that 1.2 meters accounts for a large portion of the lot. Any person looking at it today, and I might submit all of you who I believe have seen it, would agree that it certainly appears that there is more than 50% lot coverage. In regard to landscaped open space and lot coverage, we're seeing more residential lots being covered with impermeable surfaces, additions and patios and garages, which can be associated with increased runoff and other environmental impacts. We need to look at definitions of landscaped open space and consider the need for site planning requirements being needed for additions of any kind. The zoning bylaw needs to better implement the official plan policies surrounding compatibility. Clearer policies pertaining to uses, built form, and urban design expectations can help in achieving compatible intensification. There need to be clearer statements in the existing bylaw about maximum sizes of accessory units in their relation to existing dwellings and clarification of what a dwelling is. I always thought that a single-family home, for example, could not have 2 kitchens, 2 heating systems, and be completely disconnected from adjacent living spaces. However, that's precisely what the town has done in this case, as improbable as it would seem.
Mark, sorry, I just wanna make sure you know you have 1 minute left and you're gonna be
Okay.
able to get those in.
All right.
All right.
The height and roof pitch of infill development needs to be looked at. A tall building next to a bungalow with a low roof pitch is in no way compatible. Generally, infill projects don't go through site plan approval process, and we believe that they should. In our case, the only remedy for the issuance of a permit would be a court action, which is patently unfair. There needs to be a more appropriate review process. We also believe that the town should apply urban design standards to infill development in single-family home areas. This is just a sampling of ideas. We believe that with genuine determination, our zoning bylaw can be reinvented to ensure infill and intensified growth allow Collingwood to continue to be livable, attractive, and an enviable community before it's too late. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any questions, comments? Thank you very much.
So now we're moving on to staff reports.
Excuse me, Madam Chair, I don't know the protocol. Can I ask a question of staff arising out of?
Sure.
Absolutely. So through you, Madam Chair, to our Director of Planning Services, I find our deputy has made some great points. I've seen her property, and she's well represented what's transpired there. I know questions I've asked of you at previous meetings in the last month or so, you have indicated that your review of the current bylaw we have will include some looking at the policies and provisions relating to infill housing. My question today is, when would you see those provisions coming forward for some kind of public process and review? And I'm specifically referring to the infill provisions.
Director?
Thank you, through the chair. I admit I would think it would be summer, probably, before we would get there.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so seeing no other questions, then we'll move on to staff reports, and our first is planning 2019-02, extension of draft approval for a plan of subdivision Red Maple at 725 10th line, and I'd ask Nancy if she has a presentation she'd like to set us up with there.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is an application for an extension of the Red Maple Plan of Subdivision. This is a plan of subdivision, and I believe that, as it shows in our report, it has been extended in the past, but they have now entered into an agreement with us with respect to the reservoir. And also there's been a significant amount of work that has been done along Taylor's Creek in the last year. So staff are recommending that there be an extension granted to this subdivision, and that we hope in the next, during the time of the next extension, they will be able to get on with this subdivision. They have submitted to us a first engineering drawing, so there is a first submission of their engineering drawings that has also come in to us. And certainly either Brian or I would be, I'm sure, happy to answer any questions that council may have. We did receive this afternoon a number of questions from Councillor Hamlin, and I'll guess maybe, Madam Chair, I don't know whether you'd like me to answer some of those now, or if those come up during our discussion, I can certainly do what I can to answer those.
I think that we will wait until we get down the road, we'll hear from the public, and then we'll move to those answers.
And we'll also him to ask them maybe in context. Is there anyone from the public gallery who would like to speak to this specific agenda item? Okay, seeing none then, we'll put the recommendation on the table. It is that the Development and Operations Services Standing Committee support and refer the following recommendation to the next regular meeting of council, that staff report P 2019-02 be received and council extend the draft approval for the proposed Red Maple plan of subdivision for a further 3 years, which would take us to March 25th, 2022. If I could have a mover and a seconder for that, please. Councillor Doherty, Deputy Mayor Hall. Okay, discussion and questions, committee members. Deputy Mayor.
Through you to the Director of Planning. This development came before Council between 2010 and 14 for its original approvals. Went to the open market, and if I recall, the first phase was sold out successfully. And I think that there's been some frustration expressed to me, and I'm sure other members of Council, as to the delays specific to this subdivision. Could the Director just very succinctly give sort of a timeline as to why there have been some delays specific to the property and perhaps to adjacent properties within this neighborhood, and the rationale for 3 years as opposed to maybe a shorter time frame?
Thank you. Could everyone hear the question? No?
I'd be more than happy to repeat it.
Could you please?
Sure.
Thank you.
For the benefit of everybody being able to hear the question, the comment was that this development first came before council between 2010 and 14 and was given approval. I was a member of that council at the time. It went to the open market, and if memory serves correct, the first phase was sold out, and things appear to be progressing relatively smoothly at that point. There have been some concerns raised to me. I'm sure that other members of council have received correspondence or have had concerns raised. The question I'd like to just ask our Director of Planning is if she could provide a brief overview in terms of maybe some of the challenges specific to this particular property, as well as maybe some challenges specific to the neighborhood as a whole, as to why there have been delays, and perhaps then an explanation as to why staff is recommending 3 years and not a shorter time frame.
Nancy?
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. Through you to Deputy Mayor Hull. And the reason, in my view, and certainly I'll ask engineering to jump in if they feel that I miss anything, the reason that this has taken so long is that this development really can't start until there's a reservoir that's going to be built at the corner of 6th Line and Stewart Road. And that reservoir is needed in order for there to be an adequate water supply for this development. That reservoir is a very expensive piece of infrastructure. There was hope that there would be 2 or 3 developers that would share in the cost of that piece of infrastructure. It looks like one of those developers has, as far as I know, has backed out at this point in time. And then, so we're waiting for the other 2 developers to come up with the money, and I'm taking this off the top of my head, but I think it's around $6 million or thereabouts, in order to build that reservoir. So we do not have that kind of money in the bank, and frankly, until we get the developers who are prepared to pay for that reservoir, this development will not be proceeding. So someone's going to have to write a very large check or give us a very significant deposit in order to get that reservoir built. So I think that's the reason that it's been held up. You're absolutely correct. We have received over the years, I can't even tell you how many calls, when's my house going to get built? Those kinds of calls, because we get calls from people who have put down deposits, who are interested in having their house built, and they're asking, why is it taking so long? You know, what's the problem? Is it the town who's holding them up? Well, it really isn't the town that's holding them up. It's what's holding them up at the moment is the money to pay for this expensive infrastructure. We're recommending, they've asked for 3 years. They've asked for another 3 years in order to make sure that they get this all done and all settled and perhaps built in phases. But anyway, that's what they've asked for, so that's what we've decided to give them. We do hope that it proceeds sooner than that, but there again, I can't guarantee that. And I don't know whether Brian has anything else to add, but I think that's at least a thumbnail of where I believe we are.
Go ahead, Brian.
Director Farr pretty much has it correct. It's been, they're waiting, the waiting has been through negotiation of this advanced timing agreement to construct the reservoir and water mains. There were 2 people involved. Then there was a 3rd subdivision came along, delays for the 3rd subdivision to get approval. The 3rd subdivision got approved. Then it changed ownership. The new owner did not want to proceed with constructing at this time, so then it was back to 2. And so there's been some, certainly some delay on their part in terms of putting this agreement together. The agreement is now in place. It's executed by all parties, including the town. And we're currently waiting on them, one of the developers providing financing, the necessary securities to move forward. It's, in order to complete the project, it's about a year and a half to complete. So they're not going to get final approval of their plans until we're able to provide them with water. So there's a time element there for us to get, once they've provided us with the money, for us to construct the infrastructure necessary for them to get plans.
If I may, to either director, given the timeline that's passed and the fact that there were 2 parties and then 3 and we're now back to 2, and I recognize the challenge that's facing, I should say, I guess, the development community in terms of the cost. I mean, it is significant, I get that. However, is it reasonable to assume that given the cost, and now we've only got 2 parties that are negotiating, that this may be in fact just prohibitive, and that we will in fact, if we approve this, be realistically back here 3 years from now facing the same questions or challenges?
Through the chair, certainly that's a possibility, but I think that they've entered into these agreements in good faith and with every intention of moving forward, and we'd like to hope that that's the plan. The agreement was only executed late last year, so there's still a short time for them. It hasn't been that while.
A final question, and this is a question that would apply to all development. Whenever there is a delay and developers are responsible for communicating delays to their to their purchasers, is the municipality copied on that correspondence? Do we have a record of what communication has been sent out by developers over the years?
I'll put that through to Director Farr.
Thank you, through the chair to Deputy Mayor Hall, and I guess the simple answer is no. We don't necessarily have that information. It does happen, and that we get calls at the office, and I think all of us get these calls where, you know, what's the town doing to hold my house up? So we don't necessarily, and I don't think they're under any obligation to give us their, what they are directly telling their purchasers. But certainly sometimes we hear that message and sometimes we don't.
Any suggestion?
Well, the suggestion would be that going forward, any agreement that's signed, as part of that, it would be a line item that correspondence that's communicated to either purchasers or the general public be communicated to the municipality. We should know what's going on. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Doherty, did you have a question?
No, many of my questions were the same as.
And Councillor Hammond, nothing
I
additional?
know my questions were covered as well.
Okay, great. All right, so if there's no further questions, then I will reread the recommendation, and it's that staff report P 2019-02 be received and council extend the draft approval of the proposed Red Maple plan of subdivision for a further 3 years, which would take us to March 25th, 22. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? None. That's carried unanimously. Thank you. So moving on to planning report P 2019-03, we which is another extension of a current draft approval, Bridgewater on Georgian Bay plan of subdivision. And again, Nancy, do you have a presentation for us?
Sorry, sorry, Madam Chair, I better put my mic on before I start speaking. This development has had a number of names over the years, and it has also been going on for a significant number of years at this point, and I'm the first to admit that we have been at this for over a decade. The latest name is Bridgewater. They do have an application into us at this point in time for a change in their plan. They would like to change their plan of subdivision, and they would also like to up the number of units in the zoning. This is not an application to consider that, to be clear. This is only an application for the extension of their current approval, which is about 320 units. So this is not the other application. That one will have to be very carefully considered by this committee and by council. But what they have asked is for another year in order for them to be able to process and for us to review their further application. No question, this one has had several extensions in the past. I believe anyone who's been around this table before knows that this one and has seen it in the past. It will be coming for a public meeting in not too long, and we will be therefore asked to consider another revision to this plan, but this is basically a placeholder until they have that plan dealt with and considered by council.
Okay. Thank you. Is there anyone in the public gallery who would like to please come forward? And for individuals speaking who weren't booked ahead to speak, I think there should be a piece of paper there for you to sign in on. Oh, we forgot, so we'll just ask you to announce your name and so that we can put it recorded here for.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. Good evening, Deputy Mayor and members of Council. Madam Clerk, for the record, my name is Colin Travis, Travis & Associates. We are the planning consultants of record on this file, Madam Chair. I wanted to make three very brief points. The primary point, I just wanted to pick up on Ms. Farr's commentary. We had submitted an application for rezoning and what may result in a related condition of draft approval amendment in the fall. And we had initially approached the town back in late spring of 2018. Made applications in the fall that were deemed complete, and we're in the process now. So to pick up on Nancy's phrase, this is a placeholder because we want to finish the due process that we were engaged in through the complete application back in the fall. Now we are aware that the applications that are before our town and being reviewed right now will generate some questions with regards to whether or not the density is appropriate. It will raise questions whether or not that proposal is adequate in terms of, again, appropriate measures to protect the adjacent wetlands. These are questions that we are addressing as we go through process. So I just want to emphasize, Madam Chair and members of the committee, I agree with Nancy. This is more or less a placeholder for us while we complete the processes that we initiated back in the fall of 2018.
Thank you. Thank you for the clarification.
I have a question of the deputy.
Oh, sorry, Colin, could you come forward? Councillor Hammond just has a question.
Hi, I just wanted to ask, you mentioned that getting an extension of the draft plan approval acts as a placeholder. And I'm wondering why you need a placeholder. What benefit is the landowner getting by not? I have to say I'm of a mind, and I have a lot of questions for our staff tonight. But to me, this is a 13-year-old draft plan that's just been sitting there. The market's changed. The owner's really starting over. And I don't know why you need a placeholder. What is the benefit to the landowner by having this draft plan alive for another year?
Through you, Madam Chair. This allows us to continue the process we started with regards to the application for rezoning. The net result of that rezoning application may be a modification to the draft plan. The draft plan may be in substantial form to what we have right now, depending on the outcome of that process. So in that sense, we made application, as I said, at the outset when we made application for the rezoning and the conditions of draft approval back last fall, we did advise through our staff, through our planning justification report, that we may want to have an extension to the draft approval if the time frame didn't allow us to bring everything together all at the same time within at one meeting. So to answer your question, through you, Madam Chair, to Councillor, the net result of this entire exercise may be a draft plan in substantial form to what we have right now, but we don't know yet. We need to answer questions and address the issues that are raised.
But the rezoning application that's been made is nothing like the draft. You mentioned I just want to understand all the facts because I just read this today. So the rezoning application you mentioned was filed in the spring. And if I understand it, it takes the number of units on the site more than doubles, from 320 units to 655. And if the rezoning application, which I think I heard you say is a complete application, is going to public meeting soon, if that was to be approved, it would look nothing like the draft plan that's before us tonight.
Madam Chair, thank you for that question. The draft plan itself will be substantially in the same form. The block arrangements have remained the same. The extent of the developable area remains the same. The lands identified as wetlands and the related setbacks would remain the same. The subdivision itself, the draft plan, has conditions that relate to the creation of a series of blocks. The primary block is for development would be the residential block you see in the center of that graphic. So the form of the draft plan and the access to the site, as well as the relationship to the adjacent open space and environmental areas, remains the same more or less.
I hear
If
you,
I
but I don't
can
agree.
make if I can make one more point with regards to the timing. The applications were submitted in September. They were deemed complete later in the fall. The discussions with regards to those applications began with staff in the spring of 2018.
All right, so thank you. Nancy, did you wish to make any further comment to that, or you're okay?
Thank you, Madam Chair. There, just to be clear, and I did want to mention a little bit about the process that this file and generally speaking, when we have an extension to a draft plan approval, I just wanted the committee to be aware that what we do with applications for extension to draft plan approval is that we take them to our development committee and we review the applications to determine whether in the 3 years any of our internal practices, policies, procedures have changed. And we also review the conditions of draft approval and bring those up to date and change them in any way that we feel from a staff perspective that they need to be changed to ensure that the draft conditions are still current. So that's sort of the process that this has been through to date, but clearly as well, in this case, there will be some different conditions. There is one being added about water and an age, but there will be some different conditions that are likely to be applied when we review this again with the new concept in mind.
Okay, all right. Thank you. Councillor Doherty?
Thank you.
Oh, sorry, Councillor Doherty, I'm still on the public portion.
Oh.
Was this direct to Councillor Hanlon's questions or the deputant's input?
No, it was just general statements.
Okay, all right. Oh, so is there anyone else in the gallery who wishes to speak to this item? Okay, seeing none, we'll put the recommendation on the floor. that the Development and Operation Services Standing Committee support and refer the following recommendation to the next regular meeting of council. The staff report P 2019 03 be received and council extend the current draft approval for the proposed Bridgewater on Georgian Bay plan of subdivision a further 12 months to February 26, 2020, and the council revise the draft condition number 14 to include a payment contribution for the cost to oversize the force main along highway number 26. If I could have a mover and a seconder, please. You, Deputy Mayor, seconder, get it on the floor. Councillor Doherty, discussion, Councillor Doherty.
Thank you. And we've had this conversation before in regard to the age of draft plans and how many times we extend approvals on draft plans. And I know that it was, just a year ago that we had this same applicant come for an extension to this now 13-year-old draft plan. So I just feel that in principle, I'm uncomfortable approving a draft plan that really has been so very far removed in time from the original proposal and conditions for agreement. More importantly, it has already been stated that the form of the draft plan will change, that the density could double from the original draft plan. In my view, that would, I believe, almost certainly change the form of the draft plan based on adjacency to a provincially significant wetland, and thus I am not comfortable approving this extension request.
Okay, Councillor Hunt.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I echo Councillor Doherty's remarks. I think this plan has been around for 13 years and it is too long. And as I read the staff report, the current draft plan contemplates 320 dwelling units, which is comprised of 71 single detached dwellings, 87 townhouses, and 162 apartment units. And the plan that they are seeking through their rezoning, and I guess I'm not sure what else they need, but has no single family or single detached housing. The 87 townhouse units becomes 539 townhouse units, and the number of apartment units decreases slightly. And there is still a block of high density that's contemplated with no information given with respect to that. I just think that if the policy or if the rezoning application is ultimately approved, this can be taken back and we can have another go at a draft plan of subdivision. I know there will be other costs involved in them refiling, but I suspect the fees paid 13 years ago were a drop in the bucket, so I don't feel bad about that either. That's my remark.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor, any further remarks on that?
You hear me okay? Okay. Just to clarify, they're asking for 1 year. The other issues that relate to increase in density, changing the unit mix, etc., that will be coming to a future committee meeting. It will be coming before council in the public process, and they're two separate issues.
Mm-hmm.
So that said, for clarification, I'm prepared to, and I agree with Councillor Doherty and I agree with Councillor Hamlin with regards to the timeline. We've got a lot of developments within our, well, not a lot, we have a few developments within our community that have a 10+ year history, this being one of them. But given the fact that they're requesting 1 year, I'm inclined to agree or approve it, and then we'll deal with what we're now learning as what will be potentially their new proposal, and deal with that at a subsequent later time.
All right, so I did want to just summarize in terms of my understanding and clarification then. is that this one-year extension would not supersede the need for the zoning application for those changes to come back. And that if council disagreed with anything at that point, in effect, at the end of the one-year period, we'd be starting over again anyway. So because they are two separate items, there is the opportunity for council to reconsider. Because I too agree with the previous comments, but I'm not sure at this point of the process we need to concern ourselves at this point. But this would probably be the last extension, so for sure. Okay, all right, so everybody's had their comments. All those in favor of the 12-month, I'll read the recommendation again. The staff report P 2019-03 be received and council extend the current draft approval for the proposed Bridgewater on Georgian Bay plan of subdivision of further 12 months, February 26, 2020, and that council revised draft condition number 14 to include a payment contribution for the cost to oversize the force main along highway number 26. All those in favor? Opposed? And that is tied. So what that means is that this recommendation will still go forward to council, but without a recommendation from this committee. So, okay. So that takes us to planning 2019-04, which is part lot control exemption bylaw Riverside Collins Street, block 8, 51M, 1124. Nancy, if you've got a little presentation there for us.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'm sorry you're going to get tired of seeing these, but this is just another block in the Riverside townhouse condominiums or townhouses that they would like us to lift part lot control so they can divide this block into its various bits and pieces and sell the lots individually. There we go. It's a group of townhouses with street frontage.
Okay. Thank you. Is there anyone in the gallery who wishes to speak to this agenda item? Okay, seeing no hands. The recommendation is that the Development and Operations Services Standing Committee support and refer the following recommendation to the next regular meeting of council. The staff report P 2019-04 be received and council enact and pass a part lot control exemption bylaw to allow for 12 lots to be created within block 8 of registered plan 51M 1124. Mover and a seconder, please. Deputy Mayor Hall, Councillor Hamlin, discussion.
Yes, I just wanted to, through you, Madam Chair, ask one question of our Director of Planning Services. The motion before council refers to 12 lots being created, and when I reviewed your plan, I thought there were 6. So I would just ask if you could clarify that.
Nancy.
Thank you. Through Madam Chair to Councillor Hamlin, I'm sorry, it is absolutely 6 lots that we're
Thank you.
created in this one.
So I don't know if you need a motion to amend that, but if so, I would move to change 12 to 6.
Let's try an amendment. Actually, probably could just be a friendly amendment, taking back to accurate. No, not a formal amendment. Formal one? Okay, so moved by Councillor Hamlin, seconded by Councillor Doherty. Any questions on the amendment from 12 to 6 to reflect the actual request? All those in favor of the amendment? The amendment is approved, and now we'll vote on the recommendation as amended to include 6 lots, not 12. All those in favor? That is carried as amended. Thank you. All right, so now we are on to agenda item 7.4, so we will have Councillor Hamlin recuse herself for this item. So 7.4 on the agenda is Planning Report 2019-05, an authorization to discharge a development agreement, Note, McNabb, part of the north half of Lot 40, Concession 8. And we'll ask staff for presentation.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't think there's too much to say about this. This is an old development agreement that we wanted to get off title before we put any new agreements on title, just because it would, we don't want to attach to all 300 and some odd lots. Let's clean it up and get it off the title first.
Okay, anyone in the public wishing to speak to this agenda item? Come forward, please.
Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the council, Mr. Amin, members of staff. With respect to this particular item, we obviously are in favor of the recommendation put forth, and we understand that that would be tied into the subdivision agreement in order to ensure that securities are in place.
Okay, could I ask you to introduce yourself, please?
Gerard Borean, my apologies, thank you.
Thank you.
And council for no comments.
All right, thank you for that. Okay, no other questions? I don't see any questions here, so good. Okay. Anyone else in the gallery wishing to speak to this item? If not, what we are considering, that the Development and Operations Services Standing Committee support and refer the following recommendation to the next regular meeting of council. The staff report P 2019-05 be received and council authorize a discharge of the development agreement from the subject lands, Eaton Oak McNabb subdivision. Mover and a seconder, please. Deputy Mayor, Councillor Doherty, I was going to make you Deputy Doherty. Okay, questions through staff comments, Councillor Doherty.
I'm looking at this recommendation, and we're stating that only 3 of 4 matters that are connected with this agreement have been executed. So my thought is, why are we implementing expediting this agreement when we are also going to be looking at a development agreement tonight? And I would be more comfortable in doing that when we actually had an approved development agreement.
Okay, so you would be proposing an amendment that would be conditional on the signing of the next agreement before this was removed? Is that the?
Yes.
Okay. Is there a seconder for that amendment? And then I'll ask Director Fair just to comment. Okay, thank you, Deputy Mayor. Director Fair.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I believe that is certainly our intent, is to remove this one prior to another one coming into place. If council would like to put a condition that this is only removed if the other one comes into place, I don't think I have any issue with that. From my perspective, this agreement was primarily put in place to ensure that we got our parkland and our access to our parkland and some of those things that have obviously taken place. But if council is interested in ensuring that this is not removed until the next one comes into place, I believe that's fine. I believe this has to be done in an order of registering. I'm not a lawyer, but I believe you have to take this one off before you can put the next one on. Just from a legal perspective, you want to make sure that this one's gone before the next one goes on. But if it's going to be contingent on the next one going on, that's fine from my perspective.
Okay, so there's no benefit or detriment in this amendment? Okay.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Not that I'm aware of. I don't know whether anyone else knows, but I know.
Okay, so, Deputy Mayor?
Well, through you to the director, just to clarify then, if there's no benefit or detriment, if the amendment is not passed and the motion is read is passed, but then next week at council, the new subdivision agreement is not passed, does that put anything in jeopardy?
Madam Chair, through you to the Deputy Mayor, I believe I understand the statement. We would probably want this one to be there until the next one replaces it. We don't want them both on title at the same time. We want to be in a situation where this agreement is there until the other one goes off, and hopefully that all happens in one day. I'm quite comfortable with the one being contingent on the other.
Okay, good, thank you. All right, all those in favor of the amendment to add the condition of the subsequent agreement being in place are ready to go. Okay. And all those in favor of the motion as amended, did I read it in? I did, yeah, okay. So now it's the motion as amended, so all those in favor, that is carried as amended, thank you. Okay, so if we could have Councillor Hamlin back again, please, for the next item. Your Fitbit is loving this.
Oh, yeah, that's good.
So, 7.5 is Planning Report 2019-06, and it's regarding proposed land acquisition at the Pretty River Academy, 11/5/21 Highway 26. And Nancy, if you could give us some information on this matter, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and certainly I'm sure that there are others around who may be able to step up if I don't have all of my information correct. But what happened at the last meeting was that the amendment, there was an amendment that was passed to the original motion, and the amendment said that there would be a buyback option at fair market value for 20 years. What PRA have asked is that they would like to ensure that the property is preserved, and they want some assurances that if some future council declares this land surplus, that there will be some kind of a fail-safe, and therefore that they have asked that if the lands are declared surplus by the town, the PRA will have a buyback option for an amount that will cover any costs associated with the maintenance of the lands while it is within the ownership of the town for a period of 20 years. So this is an amendment that has been put forward by PRA, and they have asked us to consider this further based on the previous amendment that happened at another council meeting.
CEO Min, did you have anything you needed to add to that? Okay. Thank you. All right, so before council has input here, I've asked if there's anyone from the public who would like to come forward and speak on this item. Seeing none, the motion on the floor will be that the Development and Operations Services Standing Committee support and refer the following recommendation to the next regular meeting of council. That staff report P 2019-06 be received, and that council reconsider the resolution of December 17, 2018, and require that the land acquisition include the condition that if land is to be transferred, it is declared surplus by the town. The PRA will have a buyback option for an amount that will cover any costs associated with the maintenance of the land while it was in the ownership of the town for a period of 20 years. And motion to reconsider will be required on January 28, 2019. Mover and seconder for it as it is, Councillor Doherty, Deputy Mayor Hall. So my first question would be to declare, or to clarify through Deputy Clerk or CEO Min, is it really a reconsideration for council, or is it simply negotiation ongoing?
No, it is a reconsideration. Council made a decision, and that decision is expected to be varied, so I think it is a reconsideration.
Okay, thank you. I think procedurally I had some concerns that the committee would be discussing a report to give a recommendation to council with the potential that if council decided it wasn't going to reconsider, but I think in the interest of having the information available, should they, I guess, it would be okay to proceed, but if you could just speak to that.
Yeah, I thank you, Madam Chair. I think the other issue though is that if there isn't a willing negotiator or a willing partner, this deal will fall through. So I think what happened essentially at council a few weeks ago is that council inserted a clause, and the principals at PRA are simply suggesting that that clause be revised to include something that is more acceptable to them. So I don't think it would compromise our position, but I don't think we'll have a deal unless they are in agreement with the revised provision that council had suggested.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Okay, so any other questions or comments on this? Deputy Mayor and then Councillor Hen.
Thank you. I just wanted to make a comment that at the meeting of council where the amendment was put on the table, it was unanimously supported at that time. And I think that new information then became available via a representation from the Prairie River Academy to sort of state their overall position and the spirit in which this transaction was to take place. And it's in that spirit that I'm pleased to see that this is coming back tonight to be recommended to council to, I guess, reverse that decision, potentially reverse that decision so that we can conclude what really should be a good news story for the municipality as a whole and for the school as a partner to the agreement.
Yes.
Through you, Madam Chair, I think it is also important to recognize that this amendment does not denigrate from the intent of this agreement. In fact, the intention has always been for this to remain in the public realm, and the amendment made by council was to facilitate that objective. So the outcome is the same. I think the issue here is whether or not we recover whatever investments we put in place on the piece of land in the ensuing period, and I think we're saying that that is indeed the case. But the intent of this amendment does not denigrate from the previous decision made by council.
Thank you.
Yes, I have one question with respect to condition number 6. And what it says, and I know this is something that went by us last time, but I had more information since then. So what number 6 says is that if the town remains desirous of a public trail over PRA's resultant lot number 1, that's the development parcel that will be created, the town will negotiate such public trail connection with the future purchaser of lot number 1 and not with the PRA. So my question of staff, through you, Madam Chair, is whether the town will be wanting a public trail connection through that development parcel.
So I can deputize on behalf of the Director of Parks and Recreation. This provision was thoroughly discussed at department heads, and it is a standard clause that we would include in any future agreement. And I think the Director of Parks and Recreation is comfortable that this provision will allow him to negotiate a future trail if that's what's necessary.
Okay, thank you. Okay, all right. So to clarify, what we're negotiating here is cost recovery and a buyback option that the town would trigger by council making a decision to declare it as surplus. All right, so all those in favor of the recommendation, and that is carried unanimously. Thank you. All right, Councillor Hamlin, I think you're on the road again here. 7.6. Okay, so this is, oh, Nancy, you're getting a break. This is Public Works 2019-03 regarding Eden Oak subdivision agreement, and Brian, I'll ask you to walk us through the presentation.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to turn this over to our Manager of Engineering Services, John Velick. This is his file, and he'll walk us through the report.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you. This is the Eden Oak subdivision agreement. I would like to clarify Mr. Richardson's deputation. We do have final drawings and we do have final cost estimates. I'm not sure how that language got into the recommendation, but that is all finalized. The Eden Oak subdivision, everyone knows where it is. It's north of Prairie River Estates, east of Huron, Ontario, and west of the train trail. It's divided into 2 phases, phase 1 being on the east side. Phase 1 is subject to a pre-servicing agreement that was authorized, I believe, or executed last year. Phase 1, all the servicing in Phase 1 is in the ground, and Phase 1 is fully sold out. We have 160 building permits submitted, waiting for approval. I just want to take you through a few of the major features of the subdivision. The first being the Tracy Lane realignment. Tracy Lane is an old dirt road. It's offset from Finley Drive about 20 meters, which is obviously not optimal for a four-legged intersection. The developer has purchased property from the adjacent landowner so that Tracy Lane can be realigned and lined up with Finley Drive properly. The intersection is subject to future signalization. The developer has contributed money for this signalization, along with another developer, Mountain Croft, who also benefits from signalization of that intersection. There will be a stormwater management pond. This will be assumed by the town on the west side of the development at the end of Gulfview Drive. It's accessed off of Gulfview, and there will be a trail linkage through the pond connecting Gulfview to Tracy Lane. On the east side of the development, there's another stormwater management pond that the town will eventually assume. This pond will be fenced. We thought this is important as it's located right next to an elementary school. We don't want any children playing on the ice or falling in the summer. The park block, there is a park block that was transferred to the town back in 2010, and there will also be a future road connection to the adjacent development, which would link Kirby Avenue to Peel Street through the Riverside subdivision. So, as you know, there's been a number of issues with members of the public, mainly people, residents located along the north side of the development. The staff report we've submitted addresses all of these issues. So I'm not going to go through all of them, but I thought kind of the three major issues I'd go through with you in a little more detail. The three major issues are the height of development, groundwater issues, and the removal of trees. So the first concern is the height of development. In the worst case, it's about 2.5 meters higher than existing ground. And there are 4 aggravating factors that contribute to this issue. The first being drainage. The site, its existing condition, drained from south to north towards the lake, and then it drains in between those houses out into Brock Crescent and to Lockhart Road. We wanted more formalized drainage outlets, and those 2 outlets, the only ones that exist, are Pretty River and the Huron Ontario outlet. So obviously we need the storm sewers to drain by gravity, so to do that we needed to raise the site so that they could drain east and west. So that's one factor that affected the height of the development. Another factor was the Pretty River spill. In the regulatory storm event, the river overtops its banks, floods through the site and into the downtown area. So a lot of the homes needed to be raised to flood-proof against this spill. The third aggravating factor was the sanitary tie-in points. The only 2 tie-in points were Day Drive in Ontario, and like the storm, needs to be drained by gravity, and to do that you have to raise the center of the site so that the sewers can drain east and west. The fourth factor was groundwater. Collingwood has a very high groundwater table, and we don't want the basements built within the water table. You get overactive sump issues, basement flooding, and so we require developers to do 2 seasons of groundwater monitoring, and we require them to build basements 0.5 meter above that groundwater table. So as a result, the road along the north boundary is about 1.5 meters to 2.5 meters above existing ground. This was always contemplated since the draft approval stage. The 2010 reports that supported draft approval mentioned actually 2 to 3 meters of fill at the road along the north boundary. So the developer has improved upon that number. There will be a rear yard swale to intercept any runoff, and this swale has been sized to intercept the 1 in 100-year rain event. town has taken an easement over this swale in the event maintenance required. Neighboring sump activity. This is another issue. People in Gulfview reporting sump pumps operating more frequently. The developer has been monitoring the groundwater table since 2013. The monitoring has continued throughout construction, and there's been no noticeable rise in the groundwater table. There are areas at the terminus of Gulfview where there are standing water issues. The developer is committed to installing catch basins in this area to help move some of the water out of the area. I think that's an improvement that can be worked on. They also, currently at the end of Gulfview, there's a temporary sediment pond. This is a temporary facility, and they've typically you would see it in place for 2 or 3 more years until they've constructed phase 2 of the development, and they've committed to building the permanent pond this summer, and that will see a more uniform clay liner and a permanent outlet structure. So we're hoping that will also improve groundwater situation in the area. They've also committed to installing additional groundwater monitoring wells around that temporary pond wall, around the end of Gulfview Drive, so we can obtain more localized data in the area, so that we can continue to work through this issue if problems persist. Tree removal. Unfortunately, all the trees on the site needed to be removed because of site grading work. The boundary trees along the north property line were all preserved. There was a legal survey, and all the boundary trees that were identified beyond the property line, they were preserved or removed with the permission of the abutting landowner. But I guess that, well, not I guess, but the issue is loss of privacy, shade, and buffer for the existing residents. Fortunately, new trees can't be planted along that northern boundary on the Eden Oak side because of the fence that's being put in, swales that are being installed, retaining walls. You just can't have trees in those areas. And there was no buffer put in this area because of the similar land uses. It's single-family homes abutting single-family homes, so back in the draft plan stage, no buffer was contemplated because of that reason. Developer is installing a fence to provide privacy between the 2 properties. And just for reference, the developer will be installing a total of 508 new trees on the property, shared between the swim ponds and the road miles. So that's just a general overview, and I can answer any more questions you may have.
Okay, so first of all, I think we'll just go to the public first, John, and we'll get their questions if they have any, and then we'll have you back up to answer. Thank you. If I could just have you reintroduce yourself again, please.
I'll reintroduce myself at least, thank you. Good evening again, my name is Borean, B-O-R-E-A-N, initial G. I appear as counsel for Enoch Holmes, the developer of this site. As you've heard from your staff, we've worked with Mr. Bellick, Mr. McDonald, your planning department over a number of years, extensively. There's been 7 submissions in engineering. I can tell you in my 30 plus years as a lawyer that I've never been involved in a development that's had that much scrutiny from a department, and they've done a good job as far as we're concerned, and we believe our engineer has done a good job working with them, and that it's resulted in what we have now before you, the final drawings as was indicated, approved. We have the securities approved as to the amounts, and I know Mr. Richardson indicated that was odd what was being said, and is what you've done through your years here at Collingwood. That's pretty standard language with respect to getting the subdivision agreement executed. The subdivision agreement was provided to us in final form on Friday. It's being executed as we speak by the mortgagee, and our client will execute it thereafter and have it back to your staff by Thursday. We're hoping they've asked for it by Friday. They'll have it hopefully by Thursday, and we're hoping that when you reorganize yourselves as council a week from now, that you'd be in a position to approve it. I'm hoping that today you'll recommend the approval. You've heard with respect to the tree removal, no trees were removed without permission. No work was done on the site without being approved by the town through a servicing agreement, development agreement. Any trees that were removed were proper tree permits, an arborist report was provided. We worked with the residents that wanted the boundary trees removed. Any boundary tree that was removed was with the permission and consent of the owner, the residential owner abutting the property. No trees were removed that did not have consent or permit from the town of Collingwood. Similarly, with respect to the servicing work, all the servicing work was done pursuant to a pre-servicing agreement and approved by Collingwood, the town of Collingwood and its staff, and signed agreement. Security is put in place for the purpose of that work as well. Similarly, you'll see through the schedules that are attached to the final version of the subdivision agreement, full securities have been put in place, town being indemnified, and the continuing monitoring that's required pursuant to the agreement we've entered into, will be entering into with the town. I'm prepared to take such questions as you deem appropriate. I also have here the engineer for Eden Oak Homes and the principal of Eden Oak Homes, if there's any direct questions that you would have of him, Madam Chair, or any members of council or staff.
Thank you for that. Okay. Any questions at this point through to our speaker here? No? None? Okay. Thank you. If we need, we will call upon you again.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else in the gallery who would like to speak to this agenda item before council considers it? Yes, sir. Come forward.
Marvin Clark, Park Crescent. Madam Chair and Council. Mr. Velnick raised the point that the town is taking over the swale. I'm assuming that's going to be done through a registered easement?
Correct.
Okay, so are you taking over the maintenance of the fence and the ugly retaining wall? So the fence and the retaining wall, which is not on our property.
The fence and the retaining wall will be property of the owners of whoever buys the lots.
Okay, because they haven't even, you know, when I look at the retaining wall that we weren't supposed to have and now we have, and the gap between the retaining wall and the fence is 8 inches. So there's an 8-inch strip in there that's going to be impossible to maintain because of the retaining wall in relationship to the fence. So how do we ensure that we don't have weeds this high again this summer like we had last summer?
You're referring to the distance between the fence and the wall?
Yes.
I don't know if there is going to be a gap there. I mean,
there is a gap. It's there now. You can see it. So it's 8 inches. I measured it tonight before I came. There's also a 36-inch gap between the corner post of our lot lines, the iron bars, and the center line of the fence. So for anybody with animals, they're going to have to somehow fill that in. How are they going to do that? It's not on our property.
I don't know what you're referring to.
So if you got a corner post on my lot, you take the width of the wall, which is 20 inches, the 8 inches, the setback from the property line to the block. So when I measure from the iron bar on the corner of my lot to the center line of the fence between my neighbor and myself, 38 and 40, there's 36 inches.
Okay.
So who's gonna fill that in? I can't fill it in. It's not my property. So my only option now is to build another fence, corner to corner.
Okay.
That's acceptable.
I'm not exactly sure what you're referring to.
I'm wondering if that is something that you could meet with Mr. Vellick directly and he could.
I would certainly appreciate that opportunity, yes.
Yeah, and that way you can do a visual check.
Okay, and just with referral to the high water table and the half meter necessary between the footing and high water table, if you look at the MBE on prints, at least on the 6 submission, I don't know what they've done on 7, that actually is 0.3 of a meter higher than what the existing elevation was out in that field before they started to develop it. So basically, the footings are going to be higher than what the field was. So there's no way that that's a two-year high water table.
Yeah, that was one of the factors that contribute to the height. There are other factors.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you for your questions. Council Free Nook, if you'd like to come up and maybe answer that
It's not,
question?
I don't wanna get too, sorry, Maureen and Jerry, I don't wanna get too technical with respect to that concern, but I think Mr. Velick and Mr. DeAngelis could meet with the applicant and be able to answer that question. I can tell you that our engineer is indicating that it's not a concern and that it has been thought of by the engineering department and our engineer.
Okay, I'm sure that the gentleman would appreciate that, so. Okay, thank you.
Sorry, Mr. Platt.
Thank you. Okay, anyone else? All right, seeing none, we'll put the consideration on the floor here. And it's that the Development and Operations Services Standing Committee support and refer the following recommendation to the next regular meeting of council. The staff report PW 2019-03 be received and council authorize the mayor and clerk to execute the Eden Oak subdivision agreement by passing the attached authorizing bylaw, subject to staff receiving the remaining securities and administration fee. I have to explain that change, probably. Okay, and so for those of us who had the recommendation ahead of time, staff have removed receiving final drawings and finalized cost estimate as they're already in hand. Okay, all right, so a mover and a seconder, please, for that recommendation.
I'll put it on the table.
Okay, all right, so, okay, Councillor Doherty and Deputy Mayor Hall. Okay, questions and discussion, please. So you're ready to vote without talking about it? Okay, Councillor Doherty.
So I have a couple of questions. First of all, there is a deadline stated for completion of the west stormwater management plan of the end of September 2019, which is great. And as part of that work, it is indicated that there would be landscaping to be completed also around that pond. There was reference in an earlier deputation today about the retaining wall on the north side of that pond, the height of that retaining wall, and I'm just wondering if that landscaping plan would include landscaping or otherwise mitigating the view of that very high wall.
Through the chair, that wall is in place to preserve an existing boundary tree. So I would be hesitant to put any landscaping at the bottom of that wall, as it could damage the tree roots, the existing tree roots that wall is protecting.
Okay, thank you. As I understood it, there was a fair distance between that particular tree and the wall.
Not that I'm aware of, unless I see the developer's engineer shaking his head. I don't believe there's space. That wall essentially is a semicircle around the tree roots, and it would be as close to the tree as possible to maximize the area within our pond block. So we wouldn't want to do any work with it underneath that, in front of that wall, because it could damage the tree roots that are there.
Okay, thank you. In addition, the developer has agreed to provide the residents that back onto the north boundary with fencing and with retaining wall. And that fencing and that retaining wall, neither are complete at the moment. And because we are able to put a deadline on the completion of the stormwater management pond, it seems to me, because this was an agreement that was made between the town and the developer and the residents, that we should also put a deadline on the completion of the fence and the retaining wall.
Madam Chair, the fence and the retaining wall are currently under construction. It's winter construction, so there are winter delays that are expected in terms of the weather. Certainly on cold days like today, they're unable to work. It is a smaller contractor that's working on the project. It's not a large contractor, and he's doing what he can to get the work done as quickly as he can. Given the circumstances in terms of it being winter and winter work, typically this kind of work does not occur in the winter, but they're moving ahead to try and get it done. It would be difficult for me to come up with some kind of reasonable time frame in terms of getting it done. If the weather comes in and it stops them from working, and that can happen. We've had somewhat of a reasonable winter so far that they can continue to work, but being at frost conditions in 3 feet of frost, it will be difficult to complete the work.
Thank you. And certainly I'm not suggesting an unreasonable deadline, but I am suggesting a deadline so that we have confidence that the job will be completed within a reasonable length of time. My fear is if there is no deadline on it, then is completion open to the discretion of the builder or developer, and that we could be looking at something that wouldn't be done until the final build out of this project. So I think it's reasonable to say if we can put deadlines on things like completion of stormwater management ponds, certainly we can put deadlines on the completion of other works.
Director Dolan?
Certainly, Madam Chair. Given the winter condition issues, I think sometime in the spring would be something that would be reasonable to expect, but their intention is to get it done now. But if winter comes in, it's very difficult to complete the work if we get a full out winter that stops them from getting the work. So typically something that we would ask where there is a spring time frame, it's somewhere around the end of June, but I think that's more than enough, and they're trying to they'll be working to get it done now, not in June. They're working through the winter.
So again, if we could just put a date on it, for me anyway, if we could just put a date on it, I would suggest that Councillor Doherty, you should make an amendment to add a date, and then we can consider it to be added in as a committee. Okay, do you want me to do that now, or do you want me to, okay? Okay, as a reasonable time frame, I would suggest May 1st to have completion of the retaining wall and the fence.
Alright, so not later than May 1st of 2019. As soon as possible. Okay, alright, so we have a seconder for that amendment. I'll give it on the action, Mayor. There we go, seconded by Mayor Saunderson. Any further comment on the amendment? All those in favor of that amendment? Oh, sorry, yes.
What's the fallout if the date's not met?
Certainly, if the date's not met, it will be a winter condition issue, and it would be difficult for us to achieve it as well. Like, I guess the fallout would be we would then have to pull the securities and do the work, which is a very difficult, given that they're on site and try to get it done.
Councillor Doherty, we have Councillor Farino would just like to come up and respond to. Did you have something you wanted to add to that, sir? If you come on up, use the mic for us, please.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity through you, Madam Chair, to Councillor Doherty. I understand the concern. In terms of the agreement, as I've indicated to you, it's ready out for execution with our bank, but obviously you're in charge. And we have no problem with respect to getting that work done, and as the director has indicated, we are out there doing the work in the winter, we need to get it going. We are committed to our 160 purchasers that are waiting for the homes. So that work's important, so it's not something that will be done at the end of the game, if that's the concern which I think you expressed. I think in the agreement, we already have the September 2019 date, and that sounds like a way out there, but you have a date, and as indicated by Director McDonald, I believe I've just addressing him properly, you have already our securities. You have a situation where the developer wants to get these homes to the buyers sooner than later. In terms of that work, it's set out in the subdivision agreement, which is extensive and has the drawings. It's an obligation, as Mr. McDonald has indicated, it's our obligation to have that work done, failing which the securities will be called upon. I can tell you that I've been with Homes for 30 years as their counsel, but they've been in the business for 50 years. I've never seen it that they've ever had to have a municipality come complete their work, and certainly this is not going to be the case, but I'm going to give you that assurance. With respect to an undertaking, I'm suggesting maybe that's the easier way so that we can satisfy your concern, which is a fair concern, is that we will, in addition to giving the subdivision agreement, I think that Mr. McDonald's date of June 30th, which is the normal spring date, given winter, and that way it doesn't put the town in a situation of having to go out and say, we're going to pull your securities and do the work, we're there doing the work. I think if we could give you an undertaking in addition to the subdivision agreement, that would acknowledge that you can take the security so we don't have to go through the amendments and the time that we've spent with your counsel, your legal counsel, in getting this subdivision agreement done. So we are prepared, Combs is prepared tonight to advise you that it'll give an undertaking to complete that work by June 30th, the work in question, and to indicate in that undertaking that the security set out in the subdivision agreement will be open to the town. But that work will be done by June 30th. And the only concern is the winter conditions. We're out there trying at this point of the year.
Yeah, I do appreciate that, and so that was why I was saying I'm not going to be unreasonable, but it seems to me that we just do need to have target dates so that we, and certainly the residents of Agon to the north boundary have some light at the end of their tunnel. So would an undertaking be part of the development agreement, or is it separate from the, not a lawyer?
What I'm suggesting is that the subdivision agreement is extensive, speaks about the drawings, has that work, and we could do that Thursday when we present this to Mr. Bellick and Mr. McDonald, that we would have an undertaking reviewed by their counsel, by your counsel, the city solicitor, and make sure that it meets his requirement. That way we'd be in a position to move forward. We give you the undertaking and we'd indicate quite clearly that you can enforce it through the securities that are set out here.
Okay, thank you very much, and CIOMIN has advised that in terms of our processes is satisfactory if the committee is okay reporting that to council as part of whatever the recommendation is that comes forward.
Okay,
If you wish to withdraw the specific date amendment.
Yes, in lieu of the promised undertaking, yes, I will.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, and further discussion, questions, Councillor Torre? Oh, okay, all right, over.
Good evening, my name is Kay Broadhurst and I am one of the people that are on the north side. So I just have some general comments. This is totally off the cuff, but we've already been given 2 deadlines that have been surpassed for the fence construction. We were given at the end, I'm going to say, we put off landscaping and backyard renovations so that we could see what the Eden Oak fence was looking like. I am the person that was thinking I had very little retaining wall, came home to a 4-foot retaining wall. So there have been several issues dealing with that. The other thing that I would like to point out is I'm not sure the method in which the retaining wall and the fence has been constructed. It doesn't seem to be any rhyme or reason. I am one of the fortunate people where at least my retaining wall, if I look out my house, the retaining wall is one level, and in most places, the fence is equivalent height from my property line to the other property line. Several of my neighbors have got the stair step happening, and I'm not sure why. So I'm sure there's an engineering or a legal reason for that. But if you put yourself on our side looking out, it is not very comforting to see a fence that goes this way across your property, halfway, and then goes down and then comes across. So that's my one comment. My second comment is, I'm not sure why there are great gaps in the fence construction. So I have, say, most of my fence is finished, some of my neighbor's fence is finished, then there's a gap, and then the fence continues. So I'm not sure, I mean, I've never built a fence, I have seen fences built, but it looks like there wasn't a lot of planning put into the actual construction of the fence. One would think that the sonotubes, or whatever they're called, would be an equal distance from the corners. I don't know, it's very disconcerting. If you stand at Admiral and look to west, which I understand is probably the tree preservations, which we had to fight very hard for. Yeah, I would just like some answers as to why the fence would not be an equivalent height from one end of a property to the other.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kay. I'll see if I can get you some answers here through our staff.
Through the chair, so the top of the fence needs to be level. So if the property is slanted, it wouldn't slant the top of the fence. You would keep the top of the fence level and then stagger it as it goes up the incline. The gaps in the fence, there are two explanations for that. I think one is it's not done. I'm not sure why they've left gaps, but it just may not be done. The other reason is that there are gaps for boundary trees. They would just put a gap in the fence where there's a boundary tree and leave a bit of buffer so the tree can grow. Those are the two reasons I'm aware of.
Again, Madam Chair, there is an explanation for the gap, and I didn't catch the name of the deputant, so
Kay Broadhurst.
Ms. Broadhurst, she's correct, there is gaps, and Mr. DeAngelis, who is the engineer from Condolan, has indicated to me why there's gaps. It's part of the construction method that's out there. It is going to be filled in like Mr. Bellick has indicated, but you'll have the explanation through you.
Thank you.
Through Mr. DeAngelis.
Thank you. My name is Robert DeAngelis with Condolan Engineering. The reasons why there's gaps is the retaining wall contractor also installs the sonotubes for the post. He also installs those posts behind the retaining wall. What the fencing contractor does is he fills in those sections where the posts are built. But there are other sections where there's no wall. And when they will bring an auger in to do those posts, the fencing contractor will, and then fill in the gaps. That's why there's gaps. It's only because he can get the ones that have the posts already up completed first.
Okay. Thank you.
Oh, yes. There are other gaps which relate to the boundary trees. We are protecting the trees. We're not going through the
And giving them room to grow?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. All right. Thank you very much. Okay. Yes, Councillor Doherty.
I have just one more question, and this is in regard to the east stormwater management pond and the fencing around that. And as Mr. Bellick explained to us, because that east pond is adjacent to a school, it makes sense that it should be fenced in. However, on the park side of the pond, would it be necessary also to fence it? And the reason why I'm asking is I'm visualizing what we've been able to achieve in Riverside, where the park flows into, or not into, the pond or adjacent to the pond, and there is no interruption. It's very naturalized, and I'm wondering if we would be able to achieve that in our park in the Eden Oak development.
Okay. Thank you, Director McDonald. We'll take that one on.
Through the chair, we looked at that, but given the fact that the pond or the park, we understand that there is potential for the park to have shared use agreement with the school, and that the school and the park are more or less one and the same. Our concern was that it should be fenced along that park boundary.
Thank you. So, thank you. Those are my questions.
Okay. All right. Gentlemen, any other questions on this? Okay. All right. So, just a reminder then that the recommendation is that. Sorry, Becky, I need that. Where's the? So read it again. That's, yes.
Just a request. The first gentleman who spoke asked to speak with staff specific to that one issue. Could that meeting take place between now and council, our next council meeting?
Yes. Director McDonald.
Certainly we'll make every effort to have it happen.
All right, thank you. So maybe, okay, sorry, yeah?
I'm sorry, I want to just clarify my asks in regard to completion of the work along the north boundary. When I was referring to fence, I guess I'm also including retaining wall in that. Both of those items should be completed by the deadline that the proponent will undertake.
And I think that was assumed, and yes, they're shaking their heads, so we're all on the same page. Okay, both, all right. Okay, so the recommendation, the staff report PW 2019-03 be received and council authorize the mayor and clerk to execute the Eden Oak subdivision agreement by passing the attached authorizing bylaw, subject to staff receiving the remaining securities and administration fee. And just a reminder that final drawings and finalized cost estimate was removed because they're in the end.
Are we also going to make that subject to the additional undertaking?
I don't think we need that in the motion. I think it's understood and staff have it and they will see to it.
Yeah, I don't think we need it in the actual motion itself. We have had the public undertaking, and we will make sure that the subdivision agreement is amended to reflect that undertaking.
And if it was deemed necessary, we could always add it at council because as well, I think we're good. Okay, so all those in favor of the recommendation as read? Opposed, that's carried unanimously. Okay, if we could have Councillor Hamlin back, please. So our last staff report this evening is PW 2019-01. It's the Transit Trial Service Review. And here's Chris, all ready to go. Good man.
Good evening, Madam Chair, members of council. So we are at, we've just passed the 6 months of our extended service trial. What I wanted to do was just go through a little bit of a background for some of the newer members of council, what we had done excuse me, back in 2018. Through the Labor Supply Task Force, a survey was done throughout the stakeholders in the Georgian Bay area, and transportation was noted as one of the larger barriers to get employers within the region. So as a follow-up from the Labor Supply Task Force, a subcommittee was developed, and it's the Regional Transportation Task Force. So, if you can go to the next slide. The goal of the Regional Transportation Task Force was to analyze, plan, and advance regional efforts to improve public and workforce transportation needs. And this group was made up of representatives from each of our local municipalities, Wasaga Beach, town of Wasaga Beach, town of Blue Mountains, town of Collingwood, as well as other transportation providers and large employers within the Georgian Bay region. And we all worked collectively at developing an initiative to put some projects that were attainable for the year of 2018. So with those goals established, we put 3 projects together. One was to raise awareness of transit services that are available within the region. Number 2 was to extend the hours of public transit within the Georgian Bay region. And number 3 was to explore private transit opportunities. Next slide, please. So with the establishment of the Transit Task Force, we had monthly meetings throughout the year of 2018 and very solid collaboration from all 3 municipalities and municipal councils. So we brought to council the plan of, number 1, doing the extended service. Next slide, please. The extended service was, as you can see on the chart in front of you, the green represents the hours that existed. The yellow represent the sort of the holes in the transit system. And what we felt was a primary need was to provide consistent service across all 3 municipalities. Number 1, the main reason was for employees, that they had reliability to both get from work and get to work, or even possibly get just one way to work. And with the current schedule we had those holes, and we were missing out on a lot of riders, and a lot of people weren't taking transit. So we ran the service for 6 months. Next slide. We've had amazing results. We had Caltrans had the highest month in, I think, 4 years, second highest in 4 years, which is fantastic because we've seen a trend with our Caltrans going down in the past 5 years. On the Wasaga Beach link, we had the highest month on record, and on the Blue Mountain link, we had the highest month on record during this trial service. So our initial benchmarks for this trial service on Caltrans was 10%. Over the 6 months, we hit 13.4. On the Wasaga Beach link, our target was 15%. We hit almost 35. And on the Blue Mountain link, we had a target of 50 and we hit 65, or 64, sorry. Rounded up to 65. With December nearly doubling some of the other months of ridership. Next slide, please. This is all 3 systems over the past 6 years. In 2012 we didn't have, or 2012 or 2013 we didn't have the Blue Mountain link. But you can see that our trend on Caltrans was that it was on a decline. And this is the first year in 4 years that we're starting to see an increase on Caltrans. As well as you can see the Wasaga Beach link and Blue Mountain link in their highest in years of operation. So we have exceeded our benchmarks that we had for the transit trial period. And next slide, please. In the 6 months, just in relation to our extended hours, Caltrans saw mostly in the midday hours that we had the rise, and we didn't have any extended hours during the midday hours on Caltrans. We only increased weekend hours on Caltrans. So of our 13% increase, the extended hours that we're proposing to make permanent make up about 2.2% of that increase. But we've seen a large increase, which we are attributing to the Georgian College International Student Program. They have a lot of students that are traveling back and forth from Blue Mountain to the campus, doing the hospitality program, and we've been working with Lynn Hind at Georgian College. And it's been a really positive working relationship, and Apparently, the students are some of the friendliest kids out there, so the drivers are really happy, and it's been a really good news story for the community. But as well, with the Georgian College ridership, we've done an increased marketing campaign, which I'll speak to in a little bit, that I'd like to attribute some of that ridership to the marketing as well. The Wasaga Beach Link ridership, the way that I can see it when I'm looking at the numbers, is directly reflective of the increase on the Blue Mountain Link. So we filled the hours between 10 a.m. and 3 p.m. We're seeing the hours on 10 a.m., 3 p.m. jumped up on the Wasaga Beach Link. So we know that through the Labor Supply Task Force, when they did their transportation survey, majority of employees live in Wasaga Beach, travel through Collingwood, go to Blue Mountain, or live in Wasaga Beach and travel to Collingwood and vice versa. So it's been very successful from that point of view. As well as the Blue Mountain Link, we've seen a 65% increase on that transit link, with the majority of it made up in the midday hours. So the extension, we're making up the ridership in that extension, so that's also a great benefit. Next slide, please. So as a second part of the initiatives from the Transportation Task Force, making public transit more aware to the public was a large endeavor. We did find in the early days there's a lot of people that didn't really know that there was all these links available, and like the wide variety of places you could go via transit in the Georgian Bay region. So with help from Martin Rillo at the Business Development Center, and Tim Hendry, who's the Economic Development Officer at Town Blue Mountains, we put together a bit of a promotion plan. So we had flyers and posters, new schedules developed, put all over the existing shelters. We did a social media campaign that we had a reach of almost 30,000 people, and an engagement, you can see the numbers, of about 1,400 people. We promoted free service for Elvis Fest, the Apple Pie Festival, Hometown Hockey, and the Audi FIS World Cup is paying for extended service during their event coming up this weekend. We coordinated a regional radio campaign over the holidays. I hope some of you heard it. It was pretty good. We heard a lot of good feedback from it. We had 72 ads on the peak, 60 ads on the beach, 97.7 the beach, as well as we had the media release and some CTV news coverage for the opening of the transit terminal. Next slide, please. These were just some of the ads that were on Facebook and Instagram over the holidays, just showing our better bus hours that we promoted during the Frozen in Time Festival and the World Cup and New Year's, or not the World Cup, Hometown Hockey, and the New Year's Eve extended service. This is a draft of our new regional transit map that all 3 municipalities are contributing equally for. So the hard copy transit maps that you see around town or down at the town hall, there will be a new one that will be a regional transit map. So all 4 municipalities, including Clearview, are contributing, and there's going to be one map for everybody. So we're hopefully that we'll engage a little bit more ridership through that, and with not as full of a cost to us, because we have great partnerships now with our adjoining municipalities. Next slide, please. The third initiative as part of the extended hours of service was a private partnership. Not so much a partnership, but we facilitated as the task force to help shoulder the hours of the later hours of service. So our transit ends at 9. What some of the private employers needed was transportation to and from work from 9 to midnight, and in the morning between 5 and 7 in the morning. Unfortunately, we didn't meet this for the winter months. We kind of had a little bit of hiccups with not the town of Collingwood, but the private group getting a transportation cross-border license in time to meet the recruitment stages for employment. But they are now fully ready, and hopefully they'll be putting out their own regional transit, sort of regional employer shuttle in the springtime to help advertise for summer employment throughout the Georgian Bay region. Next slide. So our recommendation through this staff report is that we extend the service on a permanent basis. The net costs to the town of Collingwood is around $100,000 based upon a $241,000 total cost. So that's net revenue and contributions from other municipalities. And the reason why we're bringing it to you here, I know the town of Blue Mountains will be also bringing it to their council. They may not be able to have it approved in time for budget. Budget may keep on going on. The service ends on March 31st. So we wanted to bring it to you to just consider for the 2019 budget deliberation process.
Questions, comments?
This question, thank you, Madam Chair, through you to Chris. In terms of the additional costs, I'm just wondering in terms of efficiencies, by expanding the routes or extending the hours, which is really bumped the ridership, is the cost ratio versus revenue ratio increasing to help offset some of this increase in the cost?
Through you, Madam Chair, I believe that I think we were very lenient on the revenues. We didn't. I think that we could probably expect more revenues than our budget is. We don't want to overestimate on revenues because we make up a lot of our revenues through monthly passes, and those riders may use far more than a cash rider. But the ratio is still, it's between, I think, and I don't want to get my numbers right, it's about 484 that we have as our cost efficiency ratio. So the cost per rider that we pay. And it's within line with our revenues and operation expenses.
Okay, good, thanks. And then just a comment, one of the reasons, or the reason I was late today was I was at a round table with the Minister of Tourism, Culture and Sport, Mr. Michael Tavola, and at the round table discussion, the issue of transportation and accommodation became a very hot topic in the whole tourist sector, and particularly our area of the Simcoe County, and also the cross-border with Grey County and RTO 7, and he was very complimentary of the steps we've taken here. And so I certainly am supporting this request. I think that it's raising awareness for our transit system, which has not typically had large ridership. And to see these increases is very exciting. It's also essential for our residents and residents from Wasaga and the town of Blue Mountains to be able to get to work and home. And also for the Georgian College students, I, over the holidays, had the pleasure of meeting one student that was going out of town hall. He came in, he was buying tickets. We wanted to buy his bus pass. We were closed, so I had a great discussion with him about his experience at Georgian College, and I think this is all part of the essential infrastructure we need for our tourism sector to thrive, our employees to thrive, and for our college to thrive. So I will be supporting this.
Okay, so is there anyone, first of all, before we get to the rest of the council members, we're going to get back into our procedure because I was kind of considering this a department update and then I realized we actually had a recommendation. So, is there anyone from the public who wishes to speak to this agenda item? All right, seeing none, then I will read the recommendation that we are considering, that the Development and Operations Services Standing Committee support and refer the following recommendation to the next regular meeting of council, that Mayor and Council receive staff report PW 2019-01 as an update on the transit pilot project and background for consideration of a permanent service enhancement during the 2019 budget deliberations. Moved by the Mayor and seconded by Councillor Hamlin. And other comments? Deputy Mayor and Councillor.
Through you to Mr. Wisniak, I apologize if I missed this. The map that you showed of the 4 municipalities, does that include the transit length with the county, or will there be an updated version to this?
Through you, Madam Chair, Councillor Hall. There will be an updated version. The county has not finalized their route into Collingwood. That is part of the report. I did put a little bit of a note in there. The county is at this point right now, I just spoke with them last week, they've developed some preliminary routes for the town of Collingwood. So there also may be some additional sources of revenue with the county coming in to Collingwood, where they would assume some responsibility of that Wasaga Beach section. So at this point, I'm unable to say exactly when, but as for the map portion, when the county does make it final, we'll add it into the mapping.
And Director McDonald had an addition.
I think, thank you, Madam Chair. I think to elaborate a little bit more in terms of Chris's comments about the county. The county's mandate is node-to-node transportation, and what they're working on in terms of the issues at their end is where's our node? Should they be coming to Collingwood, or should they be hitting our system at Wasaga Beach and contributing towards the Wasaga Beach Collingwood link? And they're kind of working through that. They're working in terms of their efficiencies of coming down the new highway, and whether they should be coming to Collingwood and not Wasaga Beach. So we're in discussions with them right now, and we hope to get a better understanding of their desires in terms of node to node, and whether the node is somewhere in Wasaga Beach, whether it be the commuter parking lot as an example, or some other location and coming directly to Collingwood. So we're working through those issues.
Thank you. And Councillor Doherty.
Thank you. So I also will congratulate staff. This is a good news story, and it's great to see. At one point in time, we were operating at least some of our Caltrans buses on biodiesel. Are we still doing that?
Through you, Madam Chair, at this point, we're no longer doing biodiesel. We had quite a few issues with our fuel system, and with the increased emissions controls on some of the newer vehicles, we were running into some, and especially being where we are in Collingwood, we're not in the GTHA where they have contracts for biodiesel coming regularly. We moved to a diesel 3000, which actually burns at a higher, more efficient rate than the biodiesel does. I know it's not renewable, but it's a very clean burning fuel, so it's different than we're using in some of the other vehicles in public works. So to answer the question, no, the biodiesel has discontinued, but we are using an alternate fuel that is cleaner fuel.
Okay, thank you. So it's a good news story, but it's not a good news story. The second question, you referenced Clearview. I don't see them reflected in the budget figures. Are they participating or not participating?
Through you, Madam Chair, Councillor Doherty, the Clearview did not participate in the initial trial service. So with the way that our routes are structured, the first 3 months of the trial service are still between all 3 municipalities, and that's when the service ends March 31st. After that, we go back to our existing funding arrangements. So it won't be all 3 municipalities contributing into the pot. It will be Collingwood with Wasaga Beach doing that portion, and Collingwood with the town of Blue Mountains doing the other portion. Clearview Township did not have any link with Wasaga Beach. That's just part of their actual route. I understand that the county is going to be assuming, their route will be assuming a lot of Clearview Townships, so that they're going to be extending into Green. So we don't have an existing partnership with Clearview Township.
So, but the county's link service may actually wind up doing that.
Going through Clearview Township to the beach, and then that's what their a preliminary plan that I saw, but they're hoping that it will make up some of their in-town area. That you can see going through the main area of Stainer. They'll still have the inside area, but I can't really comment on Clearview's transportation planning. So.
Yeah, okay. Just knowing that, you know, Blue Mountain Resort also does employ a lot of people who live in that township, so that was where that question was coming from. So thank you very much. Those are my questions.
My question, again, thank you. I just want to echo the other council's remarks. This is really good news. My question relates to the county service, and what I'm hearing is, you know, some, I don't know, it's not really overlap or duplication, but it's two different services operating in the same general area. Is there anything more that can be done to sort of, you know, mesh the two services into one, in your view? Like, should we be exploring that? It just seems odd to me.
Through you, Madam Chair, as a full regional system, at this point, you know, we brought it up in the past, but the county's mandate from the county council is a node-to-node service. So linking municipalities, at this point, the actual municipal transits, they do not want to take over. They're just providing county node-to-node transit services. So with us, you can see that like we travel along Beechwood Road, and some of the, you know, the issues that we've been having is that we have stops along Beechwood Road because we have a lot of different, you know, there's still homes that go all the way up to the Ford line there, and Wasaga Beach has a lot of homes, so we have stops in and about there, and the county wants to provide more of an express service. So that's what we're trying to iron out with the county and ourselves right now is, you know, at what point do we maintain ours?
Director McDonald wanted to add something.
No, I was going to add, but you've actually their mandate is node to node and it's express service. Where in terms of the overlap or potential overlap, they haven't worked that out yet. But they don't want to slow their system down. They want to get people from a node to a node, and your local systems would get them to those nodes. That's the intention of the county system.
Yes, thank you. If I can just add to that, those answers are correct. But again, this was a topic that came up today at the round table. The province recognizes that Barrie is a hub, and the hub and spoke from the county is really going to get the external nodes from the 16 municipalities down into Barrie. And there's the GO line there, but they're talking about increased transportation. Barrie's talking about moving the bus station over by the train station. So again, you're going to have a hub and spoke, and so there would be a lot of synergies in this. And again, it's just to get, as Chris and Brian have both explained, each municipality, we're doing our internal transportation, and then this is connecting it. So if someone from Collingwood need to get to Barrie, then they would get on the Barrie route down there. And as the system develops, I think we'll be finding those efficiencies and being a little cleaner in how we do that. But it's a very positive thing, I think, to be able to certainly. From the industry I've worked in, the legal industry, the Ontario Works, the cost savings there is quite significant, and the environmental impacts much less. So it's a good news story there.
Okay, yep, Chris.
I just wanted to know, speaking with the county, and as we've been working with them since the beginning, that making it an efficient service from point to point is going to attract a lot of riders, because when people want to go to Barrie or they want to go, they don't want to. An hour and 45-minute ride isn't appealing to somebody. So that express service to make it in 45 minutes to 50 minutes is something that they see as, okay, we can actually get there as a normal time from driving. If we're stopping at every little spot along the way, then it makes it a little inefficient and less appealing to riders. So that's one of the reasons why they're looking at it from that perspective.
Okay, thank you. I think it is also a good news story to use my other colleagues. I was standing in the Pine Street Municipal lot the other day, and literally it looked like
row of ants coming from the new bus terminal into the bus to ride on it. So it was really nice to see. I noticed that's a huge difference in ridership when you have lineups going from one to the other. So that was great. Okay, so if there's no other questions, then I will ask for a vote on the recommendation. And that is to, that Mayor and Council receive staff report PW 2019-01 as an update on the transit pilot project and background for consideration of a permanent service enhancement during the 2019 budget deliberations. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? That is carried unanimously. Thank you. All right, so now we were on to reports and minutes of other committees and boards. And it is the Collingwood Heritage Committee minutes from October 17th. So the recommendation is that the Development and Operations Services Standing Committee receive and refer the following minutes to the next regular meeting of Council, and the Collingwood Heritage Committee minutes of October 17, 2018. Before Reagan and mover to seconder, Margaret, was it your intention to come and say something to us? Come on up.
Madam Chair, Council members. I'm responding to the Heritage minutes under the part of the public delegation where I spoke to the committee at the October meeting. And I was speaking on behalf of the Architectural Conservancy, and I was supporting our group's support of the town initializing the process of designating 400 Maple Street, otherwise known as the Victorian Annex. The town did go ahead and proceed with the process. Unfortunately, I have had confirmation from the clerk's office that the owner has decided to appeal the designation after attending the first planning session. Needless to say, this is very disappointing. This property has been under the process of being developed for so many years now. ACO Collingwood has supported the development of the property and the designation of the school building since 2011. The ACO provincial office has been following the outcome of this property as well. I did write an article that was published for the provincial newsletter to inform others of the progress towards designation and how positive it was finally going. We did receive some feedback from the provincial office as to a recommendation of a lawyer to consult who is an expert in heritage law. One consideration discussed was the fact that the heritage attributes to be conserved are the annex building alone, according to the report submitted by Sue Murdoch. If that is the case, and I'm questioning, it may not be necessary to de-designate the land surrounding the footprint of the school, because those lands were not described in the report as having heritage attributes. Perhaps, and maybe it's wishful thinking, the planning department may be able to negotiate whatever amended wording is needed to ensure that development on the property is not affected by a designation of the school building. And as you know personally, as well as on behalf of the ACO organization, I think that all avenues should be explored to achieve a positive outcome for this heritage property. And perhaps there is a way this whole appeal process could be avoided.
Okay.
Thank you for listening.
Okay, thank you for that. Okay, so staff have the information, and thank you. Okay, so a mover and a seconder, please, for the minutes as I previously read. Mayor Saunderson and Deputy Doherty. Oh, sorry. And seconded by Councillor Doherty. Nancy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I just had one question about these minutes. I noticed in the list of people who were in attendance, it also says that committee member Lee volunteered to chair at that meeting, which I believe was a correct statement, but in who was there, it doesn't say that she was in attendance. So if we could perhaps amend the list of who was in attendance to indicate that she was there. And also the reason that she was chair that day was Betty Donaher was not there. So if we could just perhaps substitute one person for another. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Make sure that clerical thing happens. Okay, no other questions on the minutes? All those in favor? That's carried unanimously, thank you. And now we have our departmental updates, and we have one booked here for by Peggy Slam and Evan Orser regarding the backflow program update. Thank you for waiting.
Good evening, yes, thank you for your patience. I know it's been a long meeting, so we'll try not to overtalk too much. But we wanted to, it's been a while since we've met with the committee, and we wanted to use this opportunity just to provide an update on the backflow prevention program. Will this work, Krista? Okay. So the bylaw to provide for the prevention of backflow and cross-connection control was passed in August of 2017. The purpose of the bylaw is to protect the distribution system from potential contaminants that could enter the system through what are typically our larger, higher risk connections. The program that we established is similar to many that have been implemented in municipalities across Ontario. Though a backflow or a cross-connection control bylaw is not a legislated requirement, it is a barrier that was recommended by Justice O'Connor following the Walkerton inquiry. Also, the Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks did issue a best practice recommendation for municipalities to establish a program. And devices are also required under the Ontario Building Code for some facilities. The town decided to establish a bylaw that would allow for premise protection, and this means that a backflow prevention device is located on service connections downstream the water meter. So it provides that barrier between the service and our distribution system. Our bylaw applies to all industrial, commercial, institutional, and multi-residential premises in Collingwood, and it does not apply to individual residential homes. So just as a quick reminder, what is backflow? Backflow refers to any unwanted flow of used non-potable water or substance from any domestic, industrial, institutional piping system into the potable water distribution system. Backflow hazards occur through what we call cross connections made to the potable water system. And there are two types: back siphonage, which is a loss of pressure on the upstream side of the connection, causing a vacuum which draws water from the service into the distribution system. And then there are back pressure, which would be the pressure on the customer side is higher than the pressure in our distribution system, and that kind of forces water back into the non-potable water back into the distribution system. And what is a cross connection? A cross connection is defined as any actual or potential connection between any part of a potable water system and any source of pollution or contamination. And we've provided a few examples there. All of these examples are direct connections to our system. We don't often think of these as connections that could potentially carry contaminants all the way back into our distribution system, but hydraulic pressure can make water move quickly and contamination can occur. And you might ask, why do cross connections exist? And I think we would say in many cases I would attribute it to a potential lack of knowledge. There are lots of times when plumbing connections are frequently installed by individuals who are simply unaware of the inherent dangers of cross connections. And cross connections are made as a matter of convenience without thought to the dangerous situation that might be created. And connections are often made with reliance on an inadequate form of protection. So that might be a single valve or another mechanical device that maybe just wouldn't actually be sufficient to prevent a backflow. Once contamination occurs in our system, significant effort is required to remove the contaminant from our distribution system if this was to occur. Water would be unavailable to numerous users while extensive flushing and testing was completed to ensure that it was out of the system fully and the water was potable and clean enough to put back into service. So that's what we're trying to avoid with this program. So when we proposed the program, we presented some stages of implementation. We started by surveying all the town facilities and making sure that all were compliant with our new bylaw before we were asking our customers to comply with it. We commenced the program with the most severe connections, and we initiated with about between 20 and 30 customers a month. And now after a year, we have hit the annual requirements of our first compliant customers. This demonstrates our workflow of the program. So there are, I know it's difficult to see, it's just kind of intended to give you an idea of how the program works, and this should, I'm not sure if this is on our website. No, not in particular, okay, but we can provide this for you if you would like to see it in more detail. So what this shows is for the two main, the first requirement is an initial survey. Customers are required to get an initial survey to determine what type of hazards exist on their property, and that will determine the level of device that is required to be installed. Once that survey is done, there might be appropriate device in place, and it might be tested appropriately, and we'll have that documentation. Then that customer is now compliant. But if the survey finds that the device is not sufficient enough or not fully compliant, then we send another letter saying what the requirement is. So that's providing detail on what exactly needs to be done. So with each of these stages, we have provided an initial letter that speaks to the requirement, and the customer is given 60 days to comply with that requirement. If they don't comply, we issue a second letter that reminds them of the requirement, and they're given another 30 days to comply. And if after that 30 days, or a total of 90 days, if we still haven't heard from them, then we issue a third letter, which Evan also attends the site just to try to have a face-to-face discussion with the owner or the owner's representative to see what the issues are and how we can help them become compliant. So we have those three stages of the letters, and we are trying to allocate a significant time for people to comply with the bylaw. This slide shows our progress to date. We have just under 700 identified premises that require backflow or cross-connection control prevention. 278 have been surveyed to date. We've gone through all the severe hazards, and we're into the moderate hazard locations. Many devices have been installed, including all the devices installed on the town's premises. All our town facilities are now in compliance, and we have also passed our 1-year mark, so we had ours tested, did our annual testing, and we're in compliance with that. And the number of qualified contractors that are available for our customers to draw from to complete the surveys and the installation and the testing on the devices has reached 29 on our website, and that potentially changes all the time. They are required to provide their certification documentation annually. So at the time we did this, we had 29 and some more pending, and those are always listed on the website and available for people to see. So we've also provided a few diagrams and some good, bad and good connections that we found here in Collingwood. And maybe, Evan, do you want to speak to these a little bit without too much detail?
Yes. So this first picture you're seeing is mortuary equipment used for preparation. This is a severe hazard connection that was made because what happens is the water pressure is turned on and it creates an aspirator which then does its job. This picture we're seeing here is actually a good example of a severe back pressure example where they have a pump directly connected to the water system which uses both water and the pressure created from the pump to do the embalming process. This is another severe hazard location. This is where we had a direct connection via a 10-inch water main between our potable water system and our raw water feed to industry. This is a direct connection made with an existing RP device for severe hazards that was found to be defective and not operating as it could, so that's a direct connection between potable and non-potable source. 10-inch main, that's a very severe hazard to our system. I should say though, these examples have been rectified.
Yes.
Also. Yeah. These are two examples. So the picture on the left is a RP for severe hazards that was installed at a location. And on the right, this is another example of two RPs in parallel. But under the standard, a backflow prevention device cannot be bypassed at any time. So this location has two in parallel so that they always have a constant feed of water if they require it. One can be taken down for service while the other one's still in operation.
So so those are just some examples of what we have found, and as we showed you with those earlier slides, like a couple of severe hazard connections that have been rectified and provide some confidence for us. This slide just gives you a bit of data, and I thought this would be of interest as it relates to our the letters that we send out asking our customers to meet the requirements. So looking at the letters that ask for the initial survey or the first letter that asks dictates that a new device is required or the installation of a new device is required, we can see that approximately a third of the customers have responded to that first letter within the 60-day period. After issuance of the second letter, we can see that another 40% then comply. And so it's about 25, I would say between 25 and 20% of the customers that we're having to send a third letter to. And again, when we send that third letter, we are, Evan is going to the site and really trying to reach out and talk to somebody face to face about what their difficulties are. So we have done some modifications. It is a new program. We did say when we implemented it, we knew we were going to have a 3 to 4 year time frame to touch all of the almost 700 connections that or customers that we wanted to reach with this program. So as we've worked through this last year, we have tried to do some modifications to make the whole process better for us and easier for the customers. So we have modified the due dates and languages in the notices to allow customers greater time frame to comply. We've worked with the customers who are experiencing some difficulties. We've incorporated the site visits if we're not getting a response or we know there's a unique situation. And then we've also tried to make things easier, created fillable PDFs that the qualified contractors can access online. So in summary, I would say the program is on schedule for the 3 to 4 year implementation. We have been able to send out the 25 letters a month to touch 25 new customers. The workload's getting busier now that we've passed the 1 year mark and we're requiring the annual testing, but so far Evan is being able to keep up. We have discovered some severe hazards, and so this confirms to us the need for a reportable program to protect our drinking water for all the residents. And in general, we're pleased to see that customers are acting on the requirements within the 90-day period. And that is our presentation. If you have any questions, Evan and I would be happy to answer.
Questions? Succinct, excellent report. Thank you very much. Okay, so are there any public delegations? Seeing none. Are there any other business from the council committee members? No other business, and I would ask for a motion to adjourn. Thank you. Thank you for everyone who's participated, and thank you to staff for all your hard work.
Wow. Yeah, a few years ago. In our case, we have we're in a crawl space. Particular sections that holders gets right into it. Typically, you make it to your time, I'm running the tap. Yeah. But I was running the tap. That's how cool. Pine Street, west side. Oh, yeah.